The Exorcism of Anneliese Michel. The story of Anneliese Michel is not just a tale of possession, it is a tragedy of faith, suffering, and human frailty. Born on September 21, 1952 in the small village of Liebelfing, Bavaria, Anneliese was an ordinary girl raised in a devout Roman Catholic family. Her parents, Joseph and Anna Michel, were strict in their beliefs, and they instilled in their children a deep sense of faith and morality. Anneliese, the second of four daughters, was particularly devout. She attended Mass regularly, prayed daily, and was determined to live a life of spiritual purity. Her early years were unremarkable. She was a quiet, intelligent girl, with a love for music and learning. She did well in school and was well liked by her peers. But in 1968, when Anneliese was just 16 years old, something changed. It began with a strange episode. One night, she woke up feeling paralyzed, unable to move or speak. Her body was stiff and she felt a crushing weight on her chest, as if something unseen was holding her down. Her mind raced with panic, but she couldn't scream for help. After what felt like an eternity, the episode passed and she was able to move again. Anneliese brushed it off, assuming it was a bad dream. But when the episodes became more frequent, her parents took her to see a doctor. She was diagnosed with epilepsy, a condition that causes seizures and neurological disturbances. Anneliese was prescribed medication, but the treatment seemed to have little effect. The seizures continued, but more disturbingly, Anneliese began to experience something far more sinister. By 1970, Anneliese's condition had worsened. She continued to suffer from seizures, but now she was experiencing terrifying hallucinations. She told her family that she saw demonic faces wherever she looked, faces that leered at her, twisted in grotesque expressions of hatred and malice. At night, she heard voices whispering to her, voices that mocked her faith and told her that she was damned. Her once calm and pious demeanor began to change. She became withdrawn, moody, and erratic. Her parents, deeply religious, began to believe that their daughter was not just sick, but that she was under attack by a malevolent force. They sought help from priests, but the church was reluctant to get involved. Anneliese's condition was still being treated as a medical issue, and the Catholic Church was cautious about declaring any case a true possession without overwhelming evidence. However, as Anneliese's mental and physical state deteriorated, her behavior became more extreme. She would go into violent fits, screaming, thrashing, and cursing in languages she didn't know. She would destroy religious objects, tearing down crucifixes and throwing rosary beads across the room. She stopped eating, claiming that the demons inside her would not allow it, and she would crawl on the floor, growling and barking like an animal. Her family was horrified. They no longer recognized the sweet, devout girl they had raised. In 1973, Anneliese was admitted to a psychiatric hospital, where she was treated for what doctors believed was a severe form of psychosis. But despite the medication and treatments, her condition only worsened. The visions of demonic faces became more frequent, and the voices grew louder. She began to speak in a low, guttural voice that was not her own, and she exhibited superhuman strength during her violent outbursts, often taking several people to restrain her. Her parents, now convinced that Anneliese was possessed, once again sought the help of the church. This time, they found a sympathetic ear in Father Ernst Alt, a local priest who believed that Anneliese's symptoms were not simply the result of mental illness. He petitioned the local bishop to allow an exorcism, but the request was initially denied. The church was hesitant, as exorcisms were rare and only granted under the most extreme circumstances. However, as Anneliese's condition continued to spiral out of control, the bishop eventually relented. In September of 1975, after years of suffering, the Catholic Church officially approved an exorcism for Anneliese Michel. The task was given to Father Arnold Renz and Father Ernst Alt, who would perform a series of exorcisms over the course of the next 10 months. The first exorcism session took place on September 24, 1975. Father Renz and Father Alt, armed with holy water, crucifixes, and prayer books, began the ritual in the Michel family's home. Anneliese, by now emaciated and frail, was strapped to a chair to prevent her from hurting herself or others. As the priest recited the prayers of exorcism, calling upon God and the saints to expel the demons, Anneliese's body convulsed violently. She screamed and cursed in multiple voices, sometimes deep and masculine, other times shrill and mocking. The priests were shocked by the severity of her reactions. At one point, Anneliese reportedly spoke in multiple voices simultaneously, each claiming to be a different demon. Among them were names familiar to Catholic theology: Lucifer, Judas, Nero, Cain, and even Adolf Hitler. These entities claimed to have taken control of Anneliese's body, and they fought viciously to maintain their hold over her. The exorcisms continued for months, sometimes lasting up to 4 hours at a time. Each session took a tremendous toll on Anneliese's already weakened body. She would vomit, scream, and thrash about, while the demons taunted the priests, mocking their faith and their efforts to save her. As the exorcisms dragged on, Anneliese's condition worsened. She had stopped eating entirely, convinced that the demons would not allow her to consume food. Her weight dropped dangerously low, and she was frequently bedridden, too weak to stand. But despite her physical deterioration, Anneliese remained determined to continue the exorcisms. She believed that she was suffering for the sins of others, and that through her suffering, she would help save lost souls. Father Renz and Father Alt, as well as Anneliese's family, grew increasingly desperate. They believed that the demons were entrenched deep within her, refusing to leave. Despite the countless hours of prayers and rituals, Anneliese herself seemed caught in a brutal tug-of-war between her faith and the dark forces that had taken over her body. There were moments when she would regain her composure, speaking softly and asking for forgiveness, only to be overtaken by the demons once again. During one exorcism session, Anneliese reportedly had a vision of the Virgin Mary. According to her family, the Blessed Mother told her that she would soon be free of the demons, but that she would have to suffer a little longer. Anneliese clung to this vision, convinced that her suffering had a purpose and that she would ultimately triumph over the evil inside her. The priests were shocked by the severity of her reactions. At one point, Anneliese reportedly spoke in multiple voices simultaneously, each claiming to be a different demon. Among them were names familiar to Catholic theology: Lucifer, Judas, Nero, Cain, and even Adolf Hitler. These entities claimed to have taken control of Anneliese's body, and they fought viciously to maintain their hold over her. The exorcisms continued for months, sometimes lasting up to 4 hours at a time. Each session took a tremendous toll on Anneliese's already weakened body. She would vomit, scream, and thrash about, while the demons taunted the priests, mocking their faith and their efforts to save her. As the exorcisms dragged on, Anneliese's condition worsened. She had stopped eating entirely, convinced that the demons would not allow her to consume food. Her weight dropped dangerously low, and she was frequently bedridden, too weak to stand. But despite her physical deterioration, Anneliese remained determined to continue the exorcisms. She believed that she was suffering for the sins of others, and that through her suffering, she would help save lost souls. Father Renz and Father Alt, as well as Anneliese's family, grew increasingly desperate. They believed that the demons were entrenched deep within her, refusing to leave, despite the countless hours of prayers and rituals. Anneliese herself seemed caught in a brutal tug-of-war between her faith and the dark forces that had taken over her body. There were moments when she would regain her composure, speaking softly and asking for forgiveness, only to be overtaken by the demons once again. During one exorcism session, Anneliese reportedly had a vision of the Virgin Mary. According to her family, the Blessed Mother told her that she would soon be free of the demons, but that she would have to suffer a little longer. Anneliese clung to this vision, convinced that her suffering had a purpose, and that she would ultimately triumph over the evil inside her. By June of 1976, Anneliese's body was ravaged by the months of starvation and physical abuse she'd endured during the exorcisms. She weighed barely 68 pounds and was suffering from pneumonia. Despite her frailty, she continued to insist that the exorcisms go on, believing that she was in the final stages of her battle with the demons. On July 1, 1976, Anneliese Michel died in her home. Her official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration, but her family and the priests who had performed the exorcisms believed that she had died a martyr, having fought a long and painful battle against demonic forces. Anneliese's last words, spoken to her mother the day before she died, were, "Mother, I'm afraid." Her death shocked the community, and soon after, the state became involved. Anneliese's parents and the two priests were charged with negligent homicide. During the trial, the defense argued that Anneliese had been possessed and that the exorcisms had been necessary to save her soul. The prosecution, however, argued that Anneliese had suffered from a combination of epilepsy and severe mental illness, and that she had been denied the medical care that could have saved her life. In the end, the priests and Anneliese's parents were found guilty of manslaughter, but they received light sentences, 6 months in jail for the priests and probation for her parents. The case sparked a fierce debate about the intersection of religion, mental illness, and the responsibility of the church in cases of alleged possession. After Anneliese Michel's death, her story did not fade away. Instead, it became the center of a legal battle that captured the attention of Germany and beyond. The case against her parents and the two priests, Father Ernst Alt and Father Arnold Renz, brought to the surface uncomfortable questions about faith, responsibility, and mental health. The trial began in March 1978, almost 2 years after Anneliese's death. The prosecution argued that Anneliese had suffered from a severe mental illness, likely schizophrenia, combined with temporal lobe epilepsy, and that she had been deprived of medical treatment. According to their theory, the priests and her parents had enabled her delusions, allowing her to believe she was possessed rather than seeking proper medical help. The fact that Anneliese had stopped eating in the final months of her life, leading to her death from malnutrition and dehydration, became a focal point of the prosecution's case. On the other side, the defense argued that Anneliese had truly been possessed by demons. Her family and the priest presented her experiences as evidence that medical science alone could not explain what she went through. They insisted that the exorcisms were necessary and justified in the face of supernatural evil. The defense relied heavily on the audio recordings made during the exorcisms, which featured disturbing growls, violent outbursts, and multiple voices speaking through Anneliese. Experts from both sides testified. Neurologists claimed that Anneliese's symptoms could be explained by epilepsy and psychosis, while religious figures suggested that something beyond the realm of medicine was at play. The tapes of the exorcism were played in court and they horrified the public. Anneliese's voice could be heard shifting into guttural tones, screaming profanities, and speaking in languages she did not know. The trial became a media sensation. The public was torn. Many believed that Anneliese had been a victim of religious extremism and mental illness, while others felt that she had been tormented by demonic forces. As the trial unfolded, it became clear that the case was about more than just Anneliese's death. It was about the clash between faith and science, religion and reason, and how society responds to the unknown. After months of testimony, the court reached a verdict in April 1978. The judges found Anneliese's parents and the two priests guilty of negligent homicide, but the sentences were surprisingly light. The priests, Father Alt and Father Renz, were sentenced to 6 months in jail, though the sentences were later suspended. Anneliese's parents were spared any jail time altogether, receiving only probation. The court took into consideration that they had already suffered enough, having lost a daughter in such tragic and painful circumstances. The verdict was met with mixed reactions. Some believed justice had been served, while others felt that the church and Anneliese's family had been let off too lightly. The case raised broader questions about the role of religion in healthcare and whether exorcism had any place in modern society. The debate raged on in Germany and beyond, with many calling for reforms in how cases of possession, or suspected possession, were handled by both the medical community and the church. In the years that followed, the story of Anneliese Michel became a symbol for different causes. For some, she was a martyr, a young woman who had sacrificed her life in a battle against demonic forces. For others, she was a tragic victim of mental illness, whose life could have been saved with the right treatment. The story of Anneliese Michel did not end with the trial. Over the years, her case became the subject of books, documentaries, and films, most notably the 2005 movie The Exorcism of Rose, which brought her story to a global audience. Each retelling of Anneliese's life and death reignited debates about the nature of possession and the dangers of religious extremism. But beyond the sensationalism, there were real lessons to be learned from Anneliese's suffering. Her case forced medical professionals to confront the limits of their understanding of the human mind. While epilepsy and schizophrenia could explain many of her symptoms, the intensity of her experiences and her unwavering belief that she was possessed challenged the boundaries of psychiatric science. For the Church, the case highlighted the delicate balance between faith and responsibility. The Vatican itself had been cautious about approving the exorcism, and after Anneliese's death, the procedures for granting exorcisms became more stringent. The Church acknowledged that mental illness should be treated with the best medical care available, and that exorcisms should only be considered as a last resort after all other explanations had been exhausted. Anneliese's story also had a profound impact on her family and the priests involved. Her parents, Joseph and Anneliese Michel, lived with the grief of losing their daughter for the rest of their lives, convinced that they had done the right thing by seeking spiritual help for her. Father Alt and Father Renz, who had been deeply affected by the exorcism, continued to serve as priests, but the weight of the case never left them. They too believed that they had fought a battle against evil, even though it had cost Anneliese her life. In the decades since Anneliese's death, the audio recordings of her exorcisms have become some of the most chilling pieces of evidence in the history of possession cases. For those who have heard them, the tapes provide a haunting insight into the torment that Anneliese endured. The recordings capture hours of prayers, violent outbursts, and voices that seem to emerge from deep within Anneliese, claiming to be the demons that possessed her. Many who listen to the tapes believe that they are proof of possession, that no mental illness could explain the change in her voice, the strength she displayed, or the knowledge she seemed to have of languages and events she had never been exposed to. Skeptics, on the other hand, argue that the tapes reveal the tragic effects of a deep psychological disturbance, exacerbated by the religious fervor surrounding her case. Over the years, the tapes have been studied by theologians, psychologists, and paranormal experts, each bringing their own interpretation to what they heard. But no definitive explanation has ever been reached. The tapes remain a powerful and unsettling reminder of the dark mystery at the heart of Anneliese Michel's story. At its core, the story of Anneliese Michel is a story about faith, faith in God, faith in the Church, and faith in the unseen forces that shape our lives. For Anneliese, her faith was both her salvation and her undoing. She believed that she was fighting a spiritual battle, and that her suffering had meaning beyond the physical world. Her conviction that she was possessed was unshakable, and in the end it was that belief that defined her life and death. For her family, faith was the only source of hope in the face of unimaginable suffering. They trusted the Church to guide them through the darkest moments, believing that only through divine intervention could Anneliese be saved. And for the priests who performed the exorcisms, their faith in God's power to overcome evil gave them the strength to continue, even as Anneliese's condition worsened. But the question of faith is a complicated one. How much faith is too much? At what point does belief in the supernatural become dangerous? And when should faith give way to reason? These are the questions that Anneliese's story forces us to confront. To this day, the exorcism of Anneliese Michel remains one of the most controversial cases in modern history. Despite all the evidence, all the testimonies, and all the theories, we are left with more questions than answers. Was Anneliese truly possessed, or was she a victim of mental illness? Could her life have been saved with the right medical treatment, or was her fate sealed by forces beyond our understanding? For those who knew her, the answer may never come. Anneliese Michel's life and death are shrouded in mystery, a mystery that will continue to haunt those who seek to understand it. In the end, her story is not just about a battle between good and evil. It is a story about the human capacity to suffer, to believe, and to seek meaning in the face of the unknown. Years after her death, Anneliese Michel's grave in Klingenberg has become a site of pilgrimage. People from all over the world come to pay their respects, leaving flowers and notes, praying for her soul. Some see her as a saint, a martyr who fought against the forces of evil. Others view her as a tragic figure, a young woman whose life was consumed by her own mind and the beliefs of those around her. No matter how her story is interpreted, Anneliese Michel has left an indelible mark on the world. Her suffering, her faith, and the questions she raised about the nature of possession and mental illness will continue to resonate for generations to come.